Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Rich, who's going to talk about drugs.
Hi, Carol. My wife up there. Rich Reck. I spent, as a way of introduction, I spent 28 years as a DEA agent. Can you hear me? Oh, speak up. Can you hear me? All right. Before that, briefly, I was a Harrisburg PD cop. So I actually went through two academies in less than a year, which meant that after I got out of DEA, I was in the best shape of my life. And that lasted for 3 months. What I thought I'd do, by the way, I 28 years, started in 90, retired in 2018. Can't believe it's been 5 years already. But what I thought I'd do, since there are certain occupations, medical, legal, law enforcement, that seem to get the most play in TV and movies, I would talk about maybe some of the contradictions or fallacies or what have you between Hollywood and reality. And then maybe at the end, I'll talk about the niche that I found in DEA as far as what kind of cases that I really like to do. But if I say drug work, what's the first thing that pops in somebody's head? Undercover. She's my plant, because I couldn't count on the rest of you to come up with it. But when you're watching movies or TV and it's drug related, it's either undercover or the other big thing is like wiretaps. I wasn't a fan of either in DEA. Even though I benefited greatly from some really good undercovers. When I first got in, a senior agent adopted me and said, let's do some cases. And he knew how to do undercover. My problem with undercover is that 90% don't know how to do it because their frame of mind is wrong. And I'll get into that in a second, but he did 2 undercovers at the same time, 2 different cases. And I think it was a great juxtaposition because in the one case, he went up to the Badlands of Philadelphia, they're in Indiana. We're going to do a street corner case. And he just pulled a street dealer off the corner and developed him as an unwitting informant and started making buys. At the same time, he's actually negotiating with a Cali cartel member, which is unheard of. I mean, that's the movie part. But the difference was he wasn't trying to buy drugs from the Cali cartel member. He was offering a service. He was saying that he could get the Cali cartel members' drugs into the Philadelphia port. So he was providing a service. And what was interesting about the 2 undercovers that he was doing is you had the cartel member who wouldn't bat an eye to kill everyone in the room if it meant his freedom. And you had the street corner little urchin. My partner was at greater danger from the street corner urchin than he was the Cali cartel member, because the Cali cartel member was a professional. Violence, if it had to be, it wasn't something that he would rush into. And if he wasn't threatened, and they certainly weren't discussing drugs, so there was no threat there. So I always found it interesting. If you Google undercover officer killed, undercover agent killed, 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 times out of 10, it's some low-level street dealer. That is where the real danger is. And that was one of my problems with undercover is, why are we risking our lives? Why are some agents risking their lives for nothing? I don't think there's any amount of drugs that are worth the risk, but there's nothing that you can accomplish in an undercover that you can't accomplish with some good old-fashioned investigative work. Having said that, I had the pleasure of working with some people that were very good at undercover. And here's the key to undercover. You control the bad guy. So many undercovers rate themselves on whether or not they get the drugs. Very bad thing to do, because you're apt to do what the bad guy wants you to do. Meet here, trip here. Let me see the money, give me the money. And if you're the undercover and that's how you view your worth, I got the drugs, you're going to make mistakes like that. Very few undercovers know it's their job to train the drug dealer. Instead of being trained by the drug dealer, the undercover's job is to train the drug dealer, because there's a saying, how you do the deal is how you're going to do the arrest. So if you're so desperate to get this guy to sell you drugs, you're going to do what he tells you to do, because you don't want to go back without the drugs. But in truth, the guy with the money is the guy in charge. If I have $1,000, I can do anything I want with that $1,000, right? If I have an ounce of this, there's only certain things I could do with that. I could use it, I could sell it, or I could rip off the buyer and sell it to somebody else and make double my money. So when an undercover is doing everything the bad guy wants him to do, he's showing weakness. That's putting ideas in the bad guy's head. And that's what happens with these tragedies. I'll rip them, I'll sell it to somebody else. So when you actually train your drug dealer, when you're willing to blow off a deal, you make it safe for everyone, including the drug dealer. So I had a partner that was very good at this, and we were of the same mind of how to do cases. We used to love when the bad guy was late, like 5 minutes late. We call the job. See ya. We're on our way back to the office. The drug dealer calls. Where are you? I'm here. Well, no, I was there. You weren't. Now, you've just put him in a tough spot if you call the deal, because this guy got the ounce from somebody else, some bigger dealer. That guy doesn't want his drugs back. That guy wants the money. He's been fronted those drugs by someone else. So now, if you've blown off the deal, he's stuck. If you say, okay, well, we'll meet tomorrow, be on time this time. He's got to hold those drugs for 24 hours. The guy he got them from wants his money. So now you've put him in a tough spot. You think he's going to be on time the next day? He's going to be right on time. And so you make your 3, 4 buys, whatever it is. When it comes time to arrest him, and you're bringing out more people than you do for the buy, you can tell your group, we're arresting this guy at 12 o'clock. At 12:05, we'll be on the way back to the office. And at 12:05, you're on the way back to the office because you trained the guy. So I have mixed feelings about undercover, because A, you're working at this level and it's very dangerous. You think about it. You're convincing someone who doesn't know you to sell them drugs that could put them in jail for 5 years. What kind of drug dealer are you going to get? You're going to get a moron. And there's nothing more dangerous than a moronic drug dealer. So mixed feelings about undercover, although I will say when we did the Cali cartel guy, that was as close to the movies as you're going to get, because we were taking him to the chart house. We were taking him to Ruth Chris. We actually had a DEA undercover yacht. And we took him out on, it was called the Illusion, which is funny. And we took him out on the yacht and wined and dined him. And I was a brand new baby agent, but it was great because I'm sitting at the table next to my partner watching his back. So I'm eating all the great food and having a blast. But that was so rare in the history of the Philadelphia undercover yacht program. We were the only ones to use the yacht because that just doesn't happen. That was a fluke. That was a unicorn. And eventually they got rid of the yacht. So in select cases, undercover is great, but it's overused in my opinion. So the other thing is wiretaps. There are so many wiretaps, and I haven't worked on one wiretap where I looked at it and said, two guys working twice as long could do the same thing as 50 guys, because when you have a wiretap, you got to shut the office down. You got to have everyone work the damn thing. So never been a fan of that either. So one thing, as I'm learning the ropes, one thing I was very good at was finding mentors. I always hated to be the guy that knew the most. I always wanted to find the guy that I could learn from. And as I'm deciding what I like and don't like, I figured out that there are 2-3 ways to get into trouble in DEA. One is to mishandle drugs. So I forgot to tell you the epilogue to the Cali cartel guy. He eventually did bring in 244 kilos of cocaine. And so we got the obligatory picture in front of the drugs, which every agent wants and eventually gets if you work hard enough. And that guy is still in jail. He got life in prison. But I'm, as the baby agent and the case agent, co-case agent on that, I had to take care of 244 kilos of cocaine. It's a pain in the ass. And that's how you get in trouble. One of the ways is mishandling, because there's a bazillion rules. In something like that, you have to take samples, do the paperwork, then you have to find somewhere to destroy the rest of it. Then you have to drive the others to New York, and it's just a nightmare. And the same for an ounce of drugs. So mismanaging drugs get you in trouble. Mismanaging CIs get you in trouble. And there's nothing worse than your typical dirtbag CI. The other thing that gets you in trouble is government cars and drinking. But there was no way I was giving up my government car or drinking, so I just took the chances on that one. So, and luckily, I used to, early on, I assumed I would get 30 days on the beach for doing something stupid with the G car and booze. So I would have like a fake balance in my checking account to cover 30 days on the beach. And it never happened, so I was very lucky. So I decided, as I'm learning, that I'm a drug agent that doesn't want to seize drugs. And I'm a drug agent that doesn't want to deal with CIs. What are my options? So as I'm learning from different mentors, I learned about the historical conspiracy, which is you attempt to hold accountable people, not for what they're doing next Tuesday, but what they did for the last 5 years at Tuesdays, which is a bigger bang for the buck. You can arrest somebody on Tuesday for a pound of weed or a pound of meth, or you could charge them for 5,000 pounds because they've been doing it for 20 years. In one, they're going to get a few years. In the other, they're going to be facing life. So how do you do a historical conspiracy? Well, you basically become a vacuum sucking in information. And I loved that. I loved looking through every possible piece of evidence, because everything is evidence when you're doing that. Hotel records, toll records, car rental records, credit cards, receipts, anything. And you put together your timeline. And the wonderful thing about that is you can't argue with it. The documents are self-authenticating, they call it. So you can't, the bad guy can't argue that on such and such a date, he went from Philly to Phoenix, Arizona. You can't argue that he checked into a hotel there. You can't argue that his phone then called a known drug dealer. You can't argue that the drug dealer then came and charged drinks on his credit card. So what you are able to do is to map out the entire organization for as long as they've been doing the drugs. You have to shake loose some cooperators, really only one, but more is the better. And you get this wonderful case where you're charging somebody for everything they did for 5 years. Now, a lot of that is boring, although I never found it boring, but you're sitting on your ass for 8 hours looking at tolls or records or whatever, but you're working towards a goal. And the one thing about drug work is you can investigate somebody for 6 months, a year, never have any face-to-face until you lock them up. And I didn't grow up on that. I grew up on good guys battling the bad guys, you know, face-to-face, personal. And I like that idea. So doing the historical conspiracies, what was great is you work for 6 months, maybe a year, putting this organization together. But your goal ultimately is when you get the organization, you decide who you want to target, and then you knock on their door. You don't have a warrant. Just knock on the door. Hi, Rich Reck. I'm a DEA agent. I'm fixing to lock you up. What do you want to do? So now you got a face-to-face with the guy. And I have 2 goals at that point. Get him to cooperate pre-indictment. Because if he does that, you're golden. Nobody knows. Nobody knows he hasn't been locked up. No one suspects anything. You can wire him up, send him into everyone in the organization, get great conversation, and you're golden. A lot of times they don't buy that because they watch TV. And I don't know how many times I heard, if you had something, you would have locked me up. Which is true on the state level, not true on the federal level. So you try and convince them. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When it works, it's wonderful. But when it doesn't, my second goal is between then and actually locking him up, I intend to give him a bleeding ulcer. I intend to terrorize him. So now it's personal, now it's fun, because then you go and talk to the next person. If that person doesn't fall, he's going to tell your first target, who the hell is Rich Reck? But he's asking about our stuff. Now you're putting that guy, the first guy, in a position, because now nobody knows who's talking. So, for one example, went to a New York guy, gave him my spiel. He didn't fall for it. Went and talked to his girlfriend. She didn't fall for it. She was tough. She might have been tougher. So then I go to the girlfriend's mother. The bad guy and the girlfriend were living with the parents. So I go talk to the mom. She doesn't like Anthony, the bad guy. She said, he's been living here for 3 months. He says he's going to pay me rent, hasn't paid me anything, and he's got $100,000 in a safe deposit box. I'm like, what? I might be able to help you get that rent money. Get the information, get a warrant, hit the safe deposit box, one of those long, skinny ones, pull it out, lift up the lid. I see junk. My heart's like, oh. Pulling out the junk. You know, at the back of the safe deposit box, there's that little empty space where the lid doesn't go all the way back. And I empty it, look. Oh, there's money. I'm thinking, but there's only that much space left. It can't be 100,000. Yeah. In hundreds? Yep. Pull it out, $100,000. Put the warrant back in the safe deposit box, put the safe deposit box back. Next time he goes to get his money. So after he took his money, he ended up back living with his mother. I've talked to everyone. he can't make any money. So when we finally arrest him, he's actually relieved because he's just been hearing nothing but Rich Reck. Who's Rich Reck? Rich Reck's talking to me. Driving back from New York, he says, Agent Reck, can I ask you a question? I said, sure, Anthony. He said, did I kill one of your children? I said, no, Anthony. I said, why are you doing this? You're a drug dealer, Anthony. What can I tell you? And I always end up, the funny thing is, I was always a good guy in the good guy, bad, or the good cop, bad cop thing. Most of the time I was the good guy. And most of the time, even though you're pursuing these guys for forever, when you finally lock them up, they finally realize you're the agent is their best hope, right? Because if they don't want to spend 20 years in jail, they have to cooperate. And the only one they can cooperate with is the guy that locked them up. So many of these guys would then turn into, I don't know how you would describe it, like you become their big brother or something. And they rely on you then to make a bigger case with their information so that they can get a break. So I had found my niche doing that. And it was wonderful. And sometimes you'd have to seize drugs because you'd go approach a guy and he would cooperate, and you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to make a lot of good phone calls and personal meetings and this and that, and we'll make a great case. And then he says, by the way, I have a load coming in. It's like, now the bosses love it. Of course, they want to seize the drugs because they want their picture in front of the drugs. And all I'm thinking is, what a pain in the ass. And I don't need it. I don't need it for my case. But sometimes you do. What's that? It's what? Avoiding seizing drugs? Yeah. No, there you go. Reality versus movies. But inevitably it happens, and that makes the bosses happy. The worst thing about doing the historical conspiracies is that it is an entirely a leap of faith. And in DEA, there are two ironclad rules. Stats don't matter. We want good cases. And the other ironclad rule is, where are my stats? So if you're undercover doing buy bust, that's great. You're getting the stats left and right. They're these stats. If you're doing the bigger case, there's no guarantee that your case is going to come together. You could literally spend a year working on a case and nothing happens. Or the U.S. attorneys, which are a pain in the ass, don't want to indict, or it takes them forever to indict. So you really had to have either a huge ego or no ego at all. I'm not sure which, to take that leap of faith and work a year hoping for the best. So that's why those kind of cases don't get made a whole lot, but they are the most effective. I've always said, if you had one or two aggressive agents and just one aggressive U.S. attorney, there is no one that you can't get because of the power of the conspiracy laws and the federal system. And one of the biggest powers that you have as an agent is the administrative subpoena. And I'd come from being a PI and being a cop, and on the state level, things are a nightmare. You want to get somebody's tolls, you have to do a warrant. And here I was then as an agent, and I said, I want to get somebody's tolls. Well, do an administrative subpoena. By the time I left, when computers came into business, I could just sit there and do an administrative subpoena. I want this guy's tolls. Give it to the boss. He signs off. Send it to the phone company. In the old days, a week later, you get the tolls. In the computer era, could be hours, get the tolls online. You can get anything with an administrative subpoena. And it made the job so much easier. You could get, as I said, the tolls, credit cards, you just name it, you could get it. And that was the wonderful thing about the historical conspiracies. You never know what was going to be evidence. We got some couriers that were bringing marijuana from Arizona to here, and they agreed to cooperate. And I'm sitting there talking to them, and they're telling us all this great information. And we're almost done with the interview. And the lady, it was a lady, said, would you be interested in the video? And I said, what video? She says, well, I took video of our trip. I said, yeah, I might be interested in that. So she brings in the VHS tape and we watch it. And she's taken video of her and her partner getting on the plane from Philadelphia, flying out there. And there's video of her meeting the brains of the operation and checking into the same hotel. And there's video of the cars that they rented with the license plate. And there's video of them driving into the desert to go meet the source of supply and the house. And then, of course, it goes dead because you don't want the source to see it videotaping. And then they're on their way back in the rental car with 300 pounds of marijuana. And they're stopping on the side of a road to look at horses. And the whole trip right on video. Imagine playing that for a jury. Wonderful stuff. What's that? They were idiots. Well, this was a great adventure. They also went to Vegas, they went to Hoover Dam. You know, this was the transporting of the marijuana was a way to make an extra buck and have a free vacation. What can I tell you? But yeah, so that was my niche. And luckily, the leaps of faith paid off. And I don't think I had any cases that eventually didn't go anywhere. If the one thing you learned that I learned real fast is trying to get the U.S. attorneys to do their job can be very hard. Although I worked with some great U.S. attorneys, but that silver platter is not a joke. They want that silver platter. So if you can convince the bad guy to plead guilty somewhere down the line, and you then go to the U.S. attorney and say, you don't need to do a warrant. We don't have to work for 2 days preparing the warrant. He's willing to plead guilty. Then they're like, oh, okay, let's do it. So I think more times than not, that's how we did our case. You almost cut the U.S. attorney out. You make your agreement with the bad guy. And of course, agreement, there is no, like the movies, they're always making agreements. You can't you can't promise them stuff. In fact, the only thing you promise them is that they will plead guilty at some point in the future, and you will try to work their information so they have something to tell the judge later on. One of my favorite stories. Do I have time for it? Oh, okay, real fast. There's a guy, and the other good thing about historical conspiracies, if your bad guy gets arrested, that doesn't mean anything. That's a good thing. Well, a lot of agents will say, well, this agency got him, so now our case is done. No, your case is fine. That's going to help you in your larger case. So guy we were looking at for meth, we're going to put 20 pounds of meth on him. He gets locked up in New York for a pound of meth. Great. He'll probably take a plea because it's only a pound. And then we'll use his plea in our bigger case. So we get our case together and we decide we're going to go approach him in jail, which is always nice. And we're going to try and get his cooperation. But we know he's like a South Philly tough guy. It's going to be tough. So I'm looking at his wife's Facebook. And she has listed, she's single. And she has all these pictures. And one of the pictures is her, him, George, in Jamaica, red stripe beer here, big hunkin' ganja here, right? So I download the picture, I go and have it printed in the photo store. My thought was, if he doesn't want to cooperate, you know, if he's just not budging, I'll show him the picture and his first reaction will be, that bitch is cooperating. That's what I'm hoping, right? So we go up. He's doing exactly what we thought, playing the tough guy. I look at my partner, he looks at me. Okay. Show him the picture. Now, this was a smart drug dealer. He used to get FedEx packages at hotels and he would follow the FedEx driver up to the hotel room, make sure there were no cops, make sure it wasn't an undercover cop. He was smart. He started using his meth and that's what got him in trouble. Like, I pushed this photo in front of him. He looks at it, his jaw drops and he says, "Oh my God, you followed me to Jamaica?" I looked at my partner. Partner looked at me. And I'm not a very good poker player. I don't have a very good poker face, but I put it on. And I said, "Well, George, you got to do what you got to do." Flipped. Just from something stupid like that. So you never know what's how things are going to unravel. Problems are always opportunities. That's what I loved about the job. Oh, we got this problem. Other agents would be like, "Oh, well, that does it." No. How do we make that a positive? So that was always a challenge. Can't believe I actually talked this long. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
We got a lot of people on Zoom.
Bill Barr.
Over the weekend, or maybe a week ago.
Hold on a second. Yeah, the people on Zoom can't hear.
Oh, gotcha. Bill Barr came out recently with his article. He says the only way to really attack the drug problem in America is to go after the cartels in Mexico with military assets. Otherwise, all the stuff on the street level doesn't matter. What's your opinion of that?
I
stance?
agree. I absolutely agree. You know, we've been saying we have for what, 50 years, we have a war on drugs. We don't have a war on drugs. If they're bringing drugs into this country, to me, that's an act of war. Go down and use the military. I completely agree with that.
Practical.
Well, you know, there was an interesting thing many years, right before I joined actually DEA, Kiki Camarena got murdered in Mexico. Some of you may have heard his name. He's part of the Red Ribbon thing every year. And that was back during Reagan. And we were trying to get his killers. Reagan closed the border. And that got Mexico's attention. So you play hard with Mexico, they need us more than we need them.
I have a question. Were you married during this time?
Yes.
What,
Hi, sweetie.
wasn't she worried about you?
She was great. I was an idiot when I went through the academy and they said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, either New York or Miami, because I figured that's where the action is. And my wife was willing to pick up and go there. Thank God at the time, DEA didn't have any money. So they were sending people back where they were hired from. So I got to go back to Philly, but my wife was in it. She's been great.
Is there a, can you hear me?
My question is around I mean, I go see billboards now promoting the concept of being able to buy marijuana pretty easily by just getting through a doctor of some sort. So how's the DEA handling that? Because it's still, if I understand it, nationally an issue from the perspective of marijuana, and yet regionally, locally, statewide, it seems to be losing that.
You know, I don't know what they've been doing the last 5 years, but I can tell you that my favorite cases were marijuana cases. Because they were smarter in general, the drug dealers. They invested intelligently. I seized AOL stock one time from some marijuana traffickers. They'd buy property and stuff like that. And because it's so voluminous, it takes a lot of assets to be a big marijuana trafficker. So I loved them. And a lot of times very relatable. Anybody in here be a drug dealer, marijuana dealer, and I can relate to everyone here. And so it was easier to flip them. So I loved it. As far as what they're doing now, I don't know. Oh, how do I do it? Yeah, get us.
If,
Oh, okay.
can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mark.
So is there a show, Rich, that you've seen that you say a show or movie
Show. Good question.
that mirrors it?
Yes. Do I have time? Breaking Bad. So I started watching it when it first came out, and there was a stupid scene where Hank, the DEA agent, is at a party and he's passing his gun around. And I turned it off. I said, this is stupid. And it did its 5-year run and it got great reviews. So I tried it again. And there was one scene in Breaking Bad where I knew I was going to watch the whole thing. And Walt and Jesse, the aspiring drug dealers, are setting up their first big deal. And scene opens and they're in a junkyard. And Jesse, who knows about drugs, looks and says, why the hell are we here? And Walt, the newbie, says, well, I thought it'd be a good place to do a drug deal. And Jesse's rolling his eyes. And here comes, I think it was Tuco, the very bad drug dealer. And he gets out of his car and he looks at the two. And the first thing he says is, what? The mall was closed? And I said, they've got DEA working on that show because that's where at least 50% of the deals go. The mall, strip malls, whatever, wherever there's people, that's where deals happen. And so I watched the rest of the show. And to answer your question, Breaking Bad is a very good representation.
I have one question. What is your was your management system at your agency that allowed you to do your research for your historical conspiracy and not bring in any business?
Well, eventually you bring in a lot of business. When the historical conspiracies come together, you're dismantling an entire organization. So I was talking about the marijuana case. We got the financiers, we got the brains, we got the transporters, we got the source of supply in Arizona. And so there's a big payoff in the end if the bosses support you. So you actually end up with high-level traffickers, not the low-level guys. Sadly, in DEA, that stat equals that stat, meaning one stat. So, and it depends on who your bosses is. I had great luck with bosses, at least after the first couple of years. And they understood what I was doing. But also, if you're a boss, if you've got a guy that likes doing buy bust, good, keep doing it. If you've got a guy that likes doing wiretaps, good, keep doing it. If you got a guy who wants to do historical, good, keep doing it. You know, you get the stats, you take advantage of people's strengths, and it always pays off.
That was a good guy in the business.
Oh, yes. If you need pictures, when I retired, I started a photography business. And a year later, I joined the Union League. And I've been very fortunate where the clubs are hiring me to take pictures. I don't take pictures for all the clubs. So if there's anyone here that hasn't seen me at their event taking pictures, maybe I ought to talk to somebody. But that's what I do now. Good.
One I know from talking to Rich, he'll take pictures of anything except first weddings. too much. This is from, he says there's too much pressure. This is from a guy who's spent his life chasing drug dealers, but there's too much pressure in taking pictures at a first wedding. All right, Rich, this was great. Everybody, see me if you want to be a speaker. Have a great day.